right, so is Bob Dylan like the greatest songwriter of all time? I mean, it's a question that people have been debating forever, you know? And we've got a whole bunch of articles, lists, quotes from other musicians all trying to, like, figure this out.
Yeah. It's a tough one, with so many talented songwriters out there. But I think when you really look at, like, all of Dylan's work, how he's changed over the years and just how influential he is, it's hard to argue, Like, he's really in a category of his own.
Yeah, and, this is a guy who won a Nobel Prize for his songwriting.
A Nobel Prize in Literature.
Right. Like, that's never happened before.
Unprecedented.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then you throw in the Grammys, Lifetime Achievement Award, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Time magazine, named him one of the most important people of the whole 20th century. I mean,
like, that's a big deal.
that says something right there.
But, we have to acknowledge that there are so many other incredible songwriters out there who could, be in the running for that greatest title. American Songwriter. Made this top 10 list, And some of those names are huge, like Lennon and McCartney, who wrote, like, all those Beatles classics.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Holland, Dozier Holland. Those Motown guys, they were incredible. And then, of course, you have, like, Paul Simon, Bruce Springsteen, Stevie Wonder.
It's a pretty impressive list.
Right. Like, there are a lot of amazing songwriters.
It's true, but it is really interesting how many of these artists, you can hear Dylan's influence in their work.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, he sort of opened up this new path for songwriting, and shifted things in a way that let other people do their thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit. How did Dylan even get started on this path?
Yeah.
What were his early influences?
Well, he was really into folk and blues music, And some of his biggest heroes were guys like Woody Guthrie, Leadbelly, even Les Paul.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you can really hear those influences in his early music, like the way he tells stories, the emotion, the simple but powerful instruments. It's all there.
Yeah, and that early folk period was so important. I mean, songs like Blowin' in the Wind and The Times, They're Changin', those became anthems for a whole generation.
Yeah.
Dealing with, so much change.
Yeah.
It's like he captured the feelings of the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, all in just a few verses.
Yeah, and what's amazing is those songs still mean something today.
Right.
That's about these timeless ideas, wanting justice and equality, and that never goes away.
Yeah, but then there's that whole thing with him going electric at the Newport Folk Festival in 1965.
Yeah.
A lot of fans felt like he was abandoning folk music, Like he was betraying them.
Yeah, it was a huge moment for sure.
Was it really just about the electric guitar, though? Or was there something more to that backlash?
Well, some people definitely saw it as a betrayal, but others say he was just growing as an artist. He didn't want to be stuck in one genre.
Right.
And there are even people who say the sound system was terrible that day, or that the crowd was mad because his set was too short. So yeah, maybe the booing wasn't all about the electric guitar, but it definitely changed his career.
Yeah, and he didn't back down. He kept experimenting, kept pushing boundaries, and that led to some of his most groundbreaking work.
Totally. The years between 1965 and 1966 were insane.
Yeah.
Albums like Highway 61 Revisited and Blonde on Blonde, they changed what popular music could be.
And that's where we get like a Rolling Stone, which Rolling Stone magazine actually named the #1 greatest song of all time.
Wow.
I mean, what do you think makes that song so revolutionary?
I think it's a bunch of things. The lyrics are so raw and personal, and then the way he blends folk and rock and blues all together, and that driving rhythm, it's like he took everything that came before and created something totally new.
Bruce Springsteen said, hearing the beginning of that song, like the snare drum, was like somebody had kicked open the door to your mind.
Wow.
And it's true. It's like Dylan's music made you think differently about things.
Yeah, and it's not just the music, it's the lyrics, too.
Right.
He's not just rhyming words. He's telling these complex stories and making these characters come alive, It's like poetry in a song.
Yeah.
Very few songwriters can do that.
And then you have Tangled Up in Blue, where he plays with time and perspective in this totally new way.
Oh, yeah. That song is fascinating, how he switches between characters, from first person to third person, and it's all kind of unclear on purpose.
Right.
He wasn't afraid to experiment with how he told the story,
Yeah.
He made the listener really work to understand it.
And he wasn't afraid to talk about important social issues,
Yeah.
Like Hurricane, that song about Hurricane Carter, the boxer who was wrongly convicted of murder.
Oh, yeah. That's a great example of how he could combine social commentary with storytelling.
Yeah, he wasn't just writing about his own problems. He was talking about the world around him.
Exactly. Shining a light on injustice, giving a voice to the people who didn't have one.
And speaking of storytelling, after that motorcycle accident in '66, Dylan kind of disappeared for a while and ended up recording those basement tapes with the band.
Oh,
It's like all this creativity just poured out of him while he was hidden away.
the amount of music he made during that time is crazy, over 100 songs.
Wow.
It shows how much he just had to create, and a lot of those songs were just demos for other artists, but then they became hits for people like The Byrds, Julie Driscoll, Manfred Mann.
Really?
Yeah, he wasn't even planning on releasing them himself.
That's wild. And those recordings started the whole bootleg thing, with fans trying to find any new Dylan music they could get their hands on.
Exactly. It shows just how badly people wanted his music, even when he's being quiet. And that's also when he started experimenting with all these different genres: gospel, country, pop, even jazz.
Yeah.
He was always changing, never wanted to be put in a box.
But even as he changed his style, you could always tell it was Dylan. That unique voice. Those lyrics, you can't mistake them.
You're right. And that voice, that way of looking at the world, it had a huge impact on other musicians.
Totally. We already talked about the Byrds with Mr. Tambourine Man.
Yeah.
But the band themselves were super influenced by working with Dylan.
Oh, for sure.
They toured with him, worked on those basement tapes, and even put some unreleased Dylan songs on their first album.
It shows how much respect other musicians had for him. And it wasn't just the Byrds and the band. Johnny Cash called Dylan the greatest writer of our time when he introduced Wanted Man on his show.
Wow. Coming from Johnny Cash, that's a huge compliment.
Yeah, and the list of musicians who say they were influenced by Dylan is massive. The Beatles, Neil Young, David Bowie, Patti Smith, Tom Waits, you name it.
That's incredible.
And it's not just one type of music either, You can hear Dylan's influence in rock, folk, country punk, even hip-hop. That's pretty rare. It shows how universal his themes are. He connects with artists from all kinds of backgrounds.
So we talked about a lot, his early influences, those groundbreaking albums, his lyrics, his impact on other musicians, but
yeah,
we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore in Dylan's music.
Yeah, there is.
And in part 2, we're going to dig even deeper into what makes his work so powerful and why so many people think he's the best songwriter ever. But before we go, I want to hear from you.
Yeah.
What do you think about Dylan's music? What makes him special to you? Share your thoughts, and we might even feature them in a future episode.
Welcome back.
Oh.
When we talk about Dylan's influence, I think it goes beyond just musicians, Like his words have become part of our everyday language.
Yeah, it's true. Like, how many times have you heard someone say, the times they are a-changin', and they don't even realize it's from Dylan?
Right, or like blowing in the wind has become this like phrase for, when you're questioning things or searching for something.
It's like his lyrics are so powerful, they've gone beyond music.
Yeah.
We use them to talk about ideas and feelings, even politics.
Absolutely. And it's not just the protest songs either. Even his more personal songs, like they connect with people on a really deep level. Like in Tangled Up in Blue, where he jumps around in time and switches perspectives. What do you think he was trying to do with that?
I think he was trying to show how memory works, like how we remember things in bits and pieces.
Yeah.
It's not a straight line. It's like a jumble of emotions and images and moments.
Right, like he's letting us inside his head,
Yeah.
showing us how he's dealing with love and loss and time.
And that's what makes it so relatable, I think.
Yeah.
We've all felt that feeling of being tangled up in our own lives,
Totally. And you can see how that kind of songwriting influenced other artists.
Yeah.
Suddenly a song didn't have to tell a story in a normal way. It could be like a collage,
Right.
A mix of feelings and impressions.
Right. It opened up a whole new world for songwriters.
Yeah. And that brings us to another thing that makes Dylan so great.
Mm-hmm.
His willingness to change and experiment and try new things.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about him going from folk to electric, but that was just the beginning.
Right. He went on to do gospel, country, pop, even jazz.
It's like he was always searching for new sounds, new ways to express himself.
Yeah. A lot of artists find something that works and they stick with it. But Dylan was different.
Totally. He was all about change, always pushing boundaries. And I think that's what kept his music fresh for so long.
Yeah, over 6 decades.
It's amazing to think that he's still touring and making music today.
I know. It's incredible.
Like, how many artists can you say that about?
Not many. It really shows how talented he is and how he can connect with people of all ages.
So going back to our original question, is Bob Dylan the greatest songwriter of all time?
Well, it's a question that will probably never have a clear answer.
Yeah.
But I think after everything we've talked about, his lyrics, his music, his impact on culture, the fact that he's been doing this for so long, I think it's fair to say he's one of the greats.
For sure. And even if you don't think he's the absolute best, you can't deny how important he is.
Absolutely. His music has changed so many lives, inspired so many artists.
Yeah, it's part of who we are, you know.
And I think that's what makes a true legend. Their work goes beyond time and place. It speaks to everyone.
It's a legacy that most artists can only dream of.
It's true.
Before we get to our final thoughts, what do you think makes a great songwriter? You know what makes a song truly great?
That's a good question. Think about the songwriters we've talked about today. What makes them special? What do you love about their music? Let us know what you think.
All right, so we're back for the last part of our Dylan deep dive. And, you know, we've talked about all these things, his influences, his evolution, his impact. But, like, can we actually say Bob Dylan is the greatest songwriter of all time?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? And I think, like, what makes Dylan different from all these other great songwriters is that it's like he's doing something on a whole other level, you know?
It's funny you say that because I was just thinking about how, like, so many people have tried to copy Dylan's style, but never really works.
Right. It always sounds like an imitation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, it's never the real deal.
Yeah. I think it's because Dylan's voice is so unique. You know, it's so connected to who he is, his experiences, his whole way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
You can't separate it from him, you know? It's like if you tried to copy someone's handwriting, you might get the letters right, but you'd never capture the person behind it.
And it's not even just the words right. It's the way he sings them, the phrasing, the tone. It's like he's talking to you.
Absolutely. His singing is so expressive, even though it's not, like, technically perfect, you know?
Right.
He's not hitting all the right notes, but he's putting so much emotion into it, you know? It's like this vulnerability and this sense of, like, he's seen a lot of life, and it's both captivating and kind of heartbreaking.
And his music, even though it comes from folk and blues, it always pushes beyond those genres, you know?
Yeah.
Like he took everything he heard rock, country, gospel and made it his own.
He's like a musical magpie, you know, picking up shiny bits from everywhere and making something totally new.
Totally. And that's what real artistry is, right?
Yeah.
Being able to take all these different things and make something unique. So where do we stand on this whole, is Dylan the greatest thing? Can we actually say that?
Well, we have to remember that art is subjective. Right?
Right.
What one person loves, another person might hate.
Yeah.
There's no, like, scientific way to measure how great something is.
So are we saying this whole conversation is pointless?
No, not at all. I think it's good to have these debates, you know?
Okay.
It makes us think harder about art, what moves us, what inspires us, what makes us see the world differently.
So instead of trying to pick one winner, it's more about appreciating what each artist brings to the table.
Exactly. And with Dylan, you can't deny what he's done. You know, he changed songwriting forever. He pushed the limits of music, and he gave a voice to people who wanted change.
And even beyond all the awards and stuff, you know, there's this one last thought I want to leave you with. Imagine a world without Bob Dylan. Like, what if his music never existed? How would music be different?
That's a really interesting question.
Right.
It makes you think about how much one person can influence things.
Totally.
So many musicians were inspired by Dylan, you know, either directly or indirectly. Who knows how many songs wouldn't have been written or how musical movements might have turned out differently.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about.
The whole course of music could have been different.
It's almost impossible to imagine how much impact he's really had. And I think that's what makes him so important. You know?
Yeah.
There's just no one else like him.
So to everyone listening, I really encourage you to go explore Dylan's music.
Yes.
Start with Blood on the Tracks, check out the Bootleg series, and discover what makes him so special for yourself.
And until next time, keep diving deep.